Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com. This is a special session of High Power University, and it's also going to be a video used as a subject of a service alert that BHSpringSolutions is announcing for high power pistols, specifically with the Type 1 Sear lever. And if our lighting works with us, I want to show you what that means. Your traditional Type 1 Sear lever, and this is going to be all Sear levers, that's the part right here. And you can see as I'm going back and forth, it's free floating. In other words, it's not positively positioned. And that's the subject of this both Service Alert and High Power University session. This is for all high power owners who have any high power or high power clone. That would be all of your FEGs, your Arcuses, Careens, Charles Daly's, Inglis, Mauser, and others, and all your FN and Brownings up until about 1989, and some all the way as late as 1994. The subject is that floating Sear lever. We're going to explain to you the reason why it's a subject, primarily because in our service center, which has now seen hundreds of high power pistols that we've had come through, that we've done complete inspections on, and many of these Type 1 Sear lever models arrive to us capable of firing upon loading. That means you do nothing more than just rack the slide and on a loaded magazine, and you allow the slide to go forward just normally, or you rack the slide and let it go. And in that motion of going forward into forward battery, the weapon fires at the point that the round loads into the barrel, basically. We don't have data or statistics on this because I don't think we ever really foresaw that it was going to be such a common nuance of older high power pistols. But suffice it to say, we've had a lot of them arrive that way, and many of these handguns are completely stock. The problem is they're completely stock, like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old handguns. And the long and the short of it is you have a springs problem most of the time. Now there's we see everything, including high powers that have been to the gunsmith one too many times to have the sear and hammer tooth relationship filed on. And in those cases it involves replacement of more deeper than just sear spring. You get into really the operating system parts at that point. But what goes along hand in hand with that potential for firing upon loading is more than one round fired per trigger pull. So in other words, unpredictable 2-shot, 3-shot per trigger pull in full auto fashion, or just a complete magazine dump where the whole thing expels the whole magazine full auto just because you pulled the trigger one time. These all relate to one thing that's happening, but it really has a lot to do with this floating Sear lever design, and that's specifically what we're going to talk about. We're also going to use this as a tutorial for how to install this new Type 1 safety Sear lever that we're talking about, and that is the specific product that this service alert really created at BHSpringSolutions. The same designer, inventor that designed the Type 2 Sear lever. I'm going to introduce you to that. When you see the difference in these two, and there we go. The main difference is here. The part of the slide has been milled out, and the Sear lever that looked like this as a Type 1 for you guys with Type 1 Sear lever models, that was modified around 1988, 1989 by Leon Hubert at FN in Urstal, Belgium. Leon Hubert now being BHSpringSolutions Chief Weapons and Modifications Designer. This is his work at FN. This Type 2 Sear lever did two things. Number one, there's an additional hole under the sear lever in the slide area where a sear lever spring goes that the Type 1 did not have. And what that sear lever spring does is it pushes from approximately this end and keeps this business end of the sear lever. This is the part that contacts the sear. We'll show you in a moment. But it keeps that part up and away from the sear until it's time for those two to be contacting each other. It also created this modified end of the sear lever, and that blocks the firing pin, and it stays blocking the firing pin again because of a spring in the Type 2 sear lever design. That was so a lot of people call it the drop safety sear lever, but it's more than a drop safety sear lever because it also eliminated this floating effect. And to give you just a quick tutorial on what makes the high power pistol go bang. Well, here's what happens. You pull the trigger lever rises, that's here. This is the old trigger design, not BHSpringSolutions, BH Advanced trigger. With a magazine in, we'll see how that trigger lever moves to now the rear of the channel, and when it's pulled, it rises pretty much straight up. When it rises up like that, it contacts the sear lever right about there. In fact, you can see a little silver on that sear lever. That's the contact point where the trigger lever that you saw rising contacts here and presses down like that, causing this end to then rise, or in the case reach downward towards the sear in the frame. The sear in the frame where that sear lever is going to contact is right here, and as you're going to see, the sear itself sits right there and in front of the hammer. So what happens is when that sear is contacted and pushed, it rises like that, and it allows the hammer to go home to the firing pin. On the traditional operating system models, it looks like this. This is the non-SFS operating system, or the traditional operating system. You do see a much larger sear here, but it does the same thing. It blocks the hammer, and when it's depressed right here, like that, and you can see I'm doing that with my thumbnail, it doesn't take much. When it is depressed right here, the sear, it allows the hammer to then go home to the firing pin. So that's what is happening when you pull the trigger lever rises, it contacts that sear lever presses downward on this sear. Now, what keeps that sear in place? This is where we're really getting to the what causes some of these old high powers to just start firing upon loading, which is extraordinarily dangerous, or have more than one round come out per trigger pull, which is also extraordinarily dangerous when you're not expecting something like that to happen. And now we're getting to the what is happening. In the cases where this is a problem, what is happening is as this slide goes back forward on the frame, this sear lever is actually floating like this. So every time that slide comes forward, it is going to contact that sear. It's just you can't keep it from it. It's going to, and it does. And it's every time. Now, that sear itself wants to stay positioned as you see it. However, what you do see is that it can move, and it is supposed to move, because its job is to hold the hammer basically in place and stable until it is contacted here, and that sear is made to clear the hammer and allow it to go home. It's engineered that way. So you're dealing with a metal part here that wants to clear the hammer, but it is being kept from clearing the hammer by a sear spring. And the traditional sear spring looks like that, and the SFS or advanced sear springs look like that. They come in 2 of those, and those springs live, maybe we'll see it, right down in here. And if we get a little bit of light in the right way, you're going to see that sear spring. And it's putting pressure on this sear to keep it in place, to resist clearance with the hammer. As time goes by, those parts we were just looking at, the trigger lever, the sear, the hammer and the hammer tooth that engages with the sear, these hard parts last longer than a spring. And that kind of seems, ultra intuitive, I know, but it's real. This is a spring. These are springs, and these are not going to, your hard parts we were just talking about, these are going to outlive a spring by many decades, and maybe many lifetimes actually. So what happens is, over decades and decades, that sear spring becomes weak. And that jarring or that contact of that floating sear lever, and I'll tell you another thing we find is high powers where this has never been removed, it's never been cleaned. So what happens is you get a lot of black gunk, build up and just general stuff underneath one of these sear levers and around that sear lever pin, and all of a sudden this doesn't want to float as freely anymore, and now you have a real problem, because now you have a sear lever wanting to stay a little stationary, hitting a sear that's backed up by a spring that has worn out. And there's no possible way to ever really know when those circumstances are going to all come together and this thing's going to fire when I rack the slide and I let it go forward. The Type 1 sear lever with spring kit is intended to produce what you see right here. And that is a sear lever, the Type 1 design, that has a spring under it, and it stays positively positioned, has negligible impact on increasing your trigger pull, but it safely keeps that engagement end of the sear lever, the one that engages the sear, away from the sear until it's time. The kit comes with a Type 1 sear lever, and it has a little spring provision right there in the top of the sear lever. Comes also with a replacement sear lever pin. Sometimes these will split when you're reinstalling the old one if you do that, and so we've put you a new sear lever pin in there, and also the springs, the one spring that lives in the sear lever itself, which you're going to see. We give you 2 of those in this kit just in case one gets away from you. These are small springs. This is also and as a result of how many older high powers we've had coming into our service center exhibiting the malfunctions that I've explained, that was the stimulus for us contacting Leon Hubert and letting him know, hey, we need some type of a solution for this. More than just making a stronger sear spring or telling people to replace their sear springs. We need more margin for our customers and for high power owners. And this is not the first time something like this has been done. One of our companies that some would loosely call a competitor with us, we don't think of them that way, but they made a Type 1 sear lever with a similar spring as Leon's Type 2 sear lever, and theirs required you to drill a hole in the slide, and that really wasn't something that we were excited about for our customers either. So what we have done is we have created this Type 1 sear lever. When we asked Leon Hubert for a design for what we were wanting to do, I think he might have had this in his pocket already. When you replace your Type 1 sear lever, you're going to go from the left side of the slide out the right side of the slide with a 3/32 punch or a 3/32 roll pin punch, and you're going to remove that sear lever pin. Then coming back out with the sear lever, your sear lever or your pin punch, your sear lever should come out right in your hand just like that. Now, if it's been a while or it's never happened, you want to really clean this channel out good with some solvent cleaner and some good lubricant, and get that really clean in there. The hole here is even not a bad thing to even get wiped out as well. And so when you replace this, you're going to be replacing with a Type 1 Sear lever that looks like that. Let's see if we can get focused on the spring. There we go. So we get our spring oriented in our slide. There's a couple things you can do at this point. Is when you put that spring down in that hole, just a little Vaseline, we're talking a very little, on the bottom coil, and just, you know, put it down in this position with a little Vaseline on the end. And also another thing is, when you got to this point, one very tiny drop of oil on the spring. That is also recommended for the install. And the install is very easy. Okay, so what I like to do is just come just from a little angle like that, keep the spring in its place, and we're going to approximately line up with the hole. Use our 3/32 punch and center the hole in the lever. Like that. Now we're going to use, this is some Gorilla tape I've made into a nice little protector there. We're going to go ahead and reintroduce our Sear lever pin. Usually you can do that by hand. And my way of starting is the side of the hammer and that safety tape right there. And we'll get it down in there far enough like that. And now we can check it. Everything is looking great. You can see. And in all of our experience so far, these have been drop-in. In other words, nothing to change, nothing to do. You just replace the parts and put it back on your high power. Obviously, if it's been a while that, you know, other springs in your high power, it's been since they were replaced, we want you to replace all your springs. But this, that's a 3/32 roll pin punch, makes that very easy. You want your pin to be flush. And in the case of the Sear lever pin, you want to take a look. You don't want it encroaching in that channel right there, which it's not. And again, we have now the positive positioning in that with the new Type 1 safety Sear lever. And so far we have installed these in FEGs, FNs, Brownings, Arcus, Careen, Inglis, and in all cases this is a drop-in component for us. It doesn't change a thing. And as you're going to see, now one thing I just noticed is I still have a little bit of over travel, and that was the case with the previous floating Sear lever that we took out. With your positively positioned Sear lever, it is possible to have all of your trigger travel on the front end and very little or no over travel after the slide starts rearward. And the over travel I'm talking about is this. Watch my finger. You saw it move as soon as the slide started rearward, and that Sear lever cleared the trigger lever. There was a little more travel of the trigger. In a case like that, if I wanted to eliminate that, I would install a new trigger lever or a new trigger pawl, depending on which trigger I'm working with. And more than likely, what you're going to find is that's going to make a bit of a difference in that over travel. That's the Type 1 safety Sear lever, and it's been dropping in every Type 1 Sear lever, meaning that's the type 1 of this type that is just basically constructed like a straight bar. Our experience has been they drop in and function beautifully, adds maybe 1/8 of a pound to your trigger brake weight, which of course is nothing. And it adds a margin and a degree of safety now and over the years to come, and literally this one upgrade, this one safety modification can stop the unintended discharge aspect in many high power pistols. Of course, the best solution is a type 1 safety Seer lever like this with healthy springs all the way around, especially your in the discussion we're having here, that Sear spring, which originally we showed looked like that. Today we have two we call advanced Sear springs. These are used for the SFS system. You're going to see two of them look like this. You see an extra little bend here in this one. That one is approximately the same strength as your OEM that I showed you first, and this optimized Sear spring is about 85%. This spring is really not for use in high powers with the floating Sear lever, where it's not been changed out, where it's not been upgraded to the positively positioned type 1 safety Sear lever that we've been talking about. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This is Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com.